Good morning. It is November 25th, 2019, and we're back for another episode of For Our People here at Hakim's Bookstore, 52nd and Walnut, between 52nd and Walnut and Locust, 210 South 52nd Street. We're the home of black books. Had a little scheduling conflict today, so I won't be able. So we're not going to be able to be in the store. Unfortunately, the super producer Chris Arnold had to take care of a few things. We'll be back in the store next Monday, December 2nd. But right now, we're going to do it out of the house. We're still in beautiful West Philly. Instead of central downtown 52nd and Market, we're over here in Winfield for today. Our topic for today is going to be lift as we climb versus the illusion of inclusion. Let me say that again. Lift as we climb versus the illusion of inclusion, hip hop's black billionaires, right? So we're going to talk about, this is kind of an extension of our discussion last week about the Byron Allen case and beyond the legal rules that were at issue in front of the Supreme Court. We left open the question of whether we should be rooting or being activists for so-called black billionaires because, or as some folks claim, black billionaires are, to some people's mind, part of the problem. That in a capitalist society, just trying to be one of the slave owners instead of one of the slaves is great for you personally, but what about the rest of us? On the other hand, are black people, are we better off at all if Jay-Z has less? How does that help us if those among us have less? Whether or not they do with their wealth what we want them to do, perhaps it is true that they do more with their wealth in our communities than others would do in our communities with that same wealth. So even if we have complaints about black billionaires, is it better for others to have that wealth instead of us? So that's kind of the issues we're going to talk about today in respect of hip hop's black billionaires, right? Because it seems to be that they're getting a lot of props, and again, sports and entertainment seem on the one hand to be a way out, a way up. On the other hand, others see it as a caste, right? That blacks are placed in the sports and entertainment caste in this country, and that is limiting instead of freeing, that we should be engaged in more scientific, commercial aspects. And again, there are black billionaires that are in the technology world, that are in the financial world, the Robert Smiths. I forget the brother that owns Worldwide Technologies, Oprah Winfrey and all that. Well, I guess that's what's in entertainment. But again, we're going to try to bring all that in the context of also the books and scholarship that we have at the bookstore, so that you can get beyond the internet memes and the internet videos and what have you. Again, this is internet video. I love all that stuff. I love for them to whet your appetite, as I love that you're searching for something deeper than mainstream media, especially when it comes to black folks and liberation, black nationalism, what have you. However, let's not mistake the videos for the books. Having the written word, having the research, having someone putting their name on it for all time, for everyone to read, to chop up, criticize, compliment, or what have you, that means something. And not only that, having several books upon the same issue, in my view, is hugely, hugely important. As a matter of fact, let me just take a time out for 1 second and encourage you to come down to the bookstore. And we have several children's books on Harriet Tubman. So right now, there's a movie out right now. It's a major box office picture, and some say that it's supported by Comcast, who some want to boycott. Some say it's not historical fact because of certain characters. Well, I will say, for one, it is a dramatic enterprise. I don't care if, when they say based on a true story, it only has to have the kernel of the story for that to be acceptable within the American commercial marketplace. Know for a fact they never said that this was a documentary about Harriet Tubman. So they're not even warranting to you that it's going to represent the truth. For the truth, whatever that means, you're going to have to get that yourself, and especially for your children. So for your children, we have here in the bookstore, and again, I wish we were on location today so I can show you. And we have several books on Harriet Tubman that are for children, and start them early, getting their information from books instead of other sources, having them around the books to always refer to and all that good stuff. Again, this is For Our People. This is kind of a spin-off or a tribute to For the People, which was originally hosted by Lister Middleton. A lot of you, if you're my age, go back to the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, you remember Lister Middleton on PBS, along with the Tony Browder files. And it was really amazing at that time to see black folks on television speaking about black matters and about Afrocentric history and all types of stuff that was empowering instead of stuff that seems to tear us down. Again, I want to honor that. I want to bring later episodes when we get into 2020. Hopefully, we're going to bring in some of the academics and some of the scholars that we're going to discuss on this program and have them speak for themselves, because again, that's what Lister Middleton did. That was the first place I ever saw John Henrik Clarke. It was the first place I ever saw Ivan Van Sertima, and we want to bring that back into the 21st century, especially in these days and times. I think it's especially needed. Who am I? I'm Andre Smith, SmittyBanton. I am your scholar in residence here at Hakim's Bookstore. So I taught for 15 years in American Association of Law School institutions. I taught at Penn State, Widener, Florida International, Howard University School of Law. So you might guess that some of my stuff is kind of legally based. So I'm very interested in the court cases and the laws and the regulations that affect our communities. But I've also written on hip hop. I'm a tax scholar. I'm into commerce and a lot of things. So my job, as I see it, is again to bring the 21st century Ivan Van Sertima's, the 21st century Sheikh Anta Diop's that I've met in the academy, and bring them to you all. And that's what we're going to try to do here today when we talk about black billionaires. We're going to talk about it and try to reference different books and scholars that have deeper comments that you can follow up with, because again, I know you're thirsty for that type of stuff. We've been doing this again. We're trying to bring ourselves online. HakimsBookstore.com. Hakim's Bookstore on Facebook. This is going to be posted on Facebook again. We're typically on Facebook Live 11 o'clock on Mondays, and we're going to make this a regular thing. We just had a little programming coordination difficulties today. But we're going to keep this moving. We're going to keep it going. And peace to Princess Y, Chris Arnold, for all their help in the establishment of Hakim's Bookstore by Dawood Hakim in West Philly since 1959. Not only the oldest black store in Philadelphia, the oldest black bookstore on the East Coast, and one of the oldest in the entire country, so 60 years. And we're going to preserve this institution by bringing it online and taking up different media like that. So again, Hakim's Bookstore on Instagram, right? We're going to try to make our presence even greater. Know that we're doing, again, we're on the Kwanzaa season, the Christmas season. So again, 210 South 52nd Street between Walnut and Locust. Get that free parking on Chancellor, or that free parking on Locust. We got the Kwanzaa calendars, 10% off Black Friday. Right, so this Friday coming up after Thanksgiving, 10% off. They're also going to do a little special on Cyber Monday. And one thing I've tended to say even prior to coming here and being in the scholar in residence, and hopefully we can promote this, is that perhaps every Friday should be Black Friday. And what I mean by that is every Friday, try and spend money only in black institutions. Again, shout out to Joel Wilson and the I Buy Black program here in Philadelphia. And so to encourage that, how about every Friday, 52 weeks a year, becoming Black Friday, where we don't spend any money except at black-owned institutions. So again, don't spend any money. Save it for yourself. Build up your own capital base. Or spend it at black institutions only on Friday. And it's actually not that hard, right? You're going to get your hair cut You have take your significant other out to the nice meal, right? And maybe even party a little afterwards. You can all do that at a black institution. You know, the black-owned salon and the hair, barbershop. You got the black-owned restaurants, and then a little club or something at least promoted by a black person and whatnot. It's not that hard. We are in the streets. We are trying to do what we can do with the capital we have, and if we recycle those dollars, we'll be able to do even more. So let's make every Friday Black Friday, where we spend money at a black-owned institution or not at all, and we pay ourselves. Let me give another shout out. Hakim's Bookstore. We're not officially affiliated, but definitely want to support the other institutions around us, specifically the Paul Robeson House down around on Walnut Street on 50th and Walnut, I believe, 49th and Walnut, and they're having some amazing programs. Everybody in West Philly should know about the artists and the scholars and the folks that are coming through the Paul Robeson House, just as much as you should know about Paul Robeson, right? Here in West Philly, we need to know about Paul Robeson. We need to know about Absalom Jones. Knowing that the first original AME black churches are here in West Philly. There's so many things. Mifflin Wister Gibbs, I think I spoke about him in the book Power and Light last week. There's so much history in West Philly to inspire us, to take us from our current circumstances and elevate ourselves so we can lift as we climb, right? There's going to be a lot of events here at the store coming up. Again, we're trying to, as Princess Yvonne, Princess Y, our matriarch has said, we're not trying to survive, we're trying to thrive. And so look out for Hakim's newsletter. Again, go to hakimsbookstore.com, Hakim's Bookstore on Facebook. We're going to have some voter education programs here, book signings, have interns that are doing video editing classes and all types of good stuff, trying to give back and recycle the knowledge and build up our communities with all types of capital, not just financial capital, but human, social, and political capital. And I'm going to talk specifically what I mean about that in a little bit. Because we're going to talk today, our subject for today is Lift as We Climb versus the illusion of inclusion, right? Hip hop's black billionaires. And so this discussion focuses on hip hop's black billionaires, but we're talking about wealthy black people, period, right? Or middle class, or upper middle class, whatever, however you want to describe it, because again, the descriptions that are offered in media discourse today don't necessarily relate to us. When they talk about middle class white folks, then that's not really the same class as us, middle class black folks, when we talk about the same income. If you make $50,000 to $75,000, you may think you're middle income or middle class, but the facts show that the white person with that same $50,000 to $75,000 job, again, not rich, but that person typically has 7 times more wealth in the bank, in stocks and bonds, in their pension plan, than a black person that's making that same amount of money. And that's the same for their family members and all the folks in their circles, right? So we have to be careful when we talk about black rich folks or black middle class, rich versus wealthy and all that. It denotes and connotates. But more specifically to the point, how should we be evaluating these black billionaires when it comes to blackness, right? Again, I am one that believes blackness is to be against white supremacy, right? Black is not the color, it's not my skin tone, it's not whether or not I was born on the African continent, it's not my phenotype, or it's not even, in my view, culture. Like if you listen to black culture or black music or whatnot, that you're black, or again that you could take someone's black card away from them. I really don't play those games. To me, blackness is whether or not you fight white supremacy, and it's hard for each one of us to determine whether the other is. So I think we should all focus on our own fight against white supremacy to the extent we want to consider ourselves or promote our blackness and let that shine. But again, I understand we there's a very good book out there by Brandil Simio Starkey, and again, another brother that met in academia. He used to be a former law professor at Villanova. He wrote In Defense of Uncle Tom, and it's really not in defense of the character Uncle Tom, although it is, because people misunderstand that Uncle Tom, black people should really be mad at Sambo instead of Uncle Tom, but that's a whole nother story for another day. But his point is that we do have to basically enforce racial solidarity as we do on social media and Facebook and whatnot. At the same time, I argue that we need to be very, very careful that we don't promote the myth of black inferiority. So when we talk about Obama or black billionaires and we tear them down, when we take every black person that's done anything good and tear them down, what we're saying, what black people are saying, is that we're no good even when we do good. And I think that white folks or media does that enough. Um, Again, if I always say, if Obama is not good enough for you, then how could I be? Because he's better than me. Or if Puffy or Jay-Z or someone else representing hip hop, because I do consider myself hip hop. I used to backspin on cardboards way back in the '80s and whatnot. I had 2 live cruise albums, so I can't play holier than thou. So if you don't like Jay-Z, if you don't like some of the folks in hip hop, then maybe I'm interpreting that you may not like me, because I feel like with the schools and the nonprofits and the donations that they've made, the careers that they've advanced for other people, there's a strong argument that they've done more than I've done. So if they're whack, if they're sellouts and they're Uncle Toms, then I guess if you held me up there, I'd be Uncle Tom too, right? And again, to me, that promotes the myth of black inferiority. If the best and the brightest among us, if the people that are doing the most are also supposedly these Uncle Tom sellouts or whatnot, or they're inferior, or they can't do this, that, and the third, then that's demeaning all of black folks, to say that all of black folks really can't do anything. I just don't really think that's what we intend to be saying, right? But that push to aggrandize ourselves by criticizing others seems to promote that, right? So so what I'd like to do with all that is try to come up with something a little more concrete when it comes to evaluating black billionaires or black wealthy people or rich people, or as the great scholar of the 1950s and 60s, E. Franklin Frazier, called it, the black bourgeoisie. Right? Again, I'm a member of a fraternity. We're familiar with the Lynx and Jack and Jill and all those good organizations that are trying to raise upstanding, strong children and members of society. And the question always becomes, are they lifting as they're climbing upwards, or are they just trying to find a comfortable space within the system of white supremacy and thereafter basically be held out as an example of what all black people should be doing, even though we know that all black people aren't going to be given that advantage or that space. And this links to and the reason I want to link this, I think this is so appropriate to link this to last week's program, is because last week we talked about the Byron Allen case. He's a black billionaire, or at least has a $1 billion company, like the Reginald Lewis's before him, like the Madam C.J. Walker's before him. He is now in a fight with Comcast about whether or not they've discriminated against his company. And again, the law of Section 1981 of the Civil Rights Act of 1866 gives all people the rights to contract as white citizens, the same protection as white citizens. And I made the argument that if you use a grid to determine who wins a contract, right? We're talking about contractors, not employees. So winning a bid. And this person evaluating all the bids has race as just one factor of 10, right? Byron Allen, myself, other civil rights organizations are saying that should be enough to carry the day, to find that Comcast has discriminated, that they haven't treated you as a white citizen. Comcast wants to argue that you have to prove that you have won the bid. Not if you prove that race is a factor, that's just one step. Secondly, you have to prove that race was a factor and you would have won the entire bid over all the candidates in order to prevail under Section 1981. So uh, that is a harder standard. The motivating factors test is designed to rid this country of discriminating people, to try to push it towards a post-racial society. It's not a post-racial society, but it can't become one if the law doesn't push it there. Comcast and many of the several circuit courts of appeal already in this country, the courts that have already decided this issue, have said no. We just want it to be a but for. So we just only want to compensate a black person who has gone through all the loops and hoops to prove that they particularly were discriminated against. That is just an individual right, having nothing to do with eradicating racism generally, right? And again, saying I'm sorry because this one person was outwardly targeted is what the Supreme Court has seemed to whittle civil rights down to. Not an attempt to make America better, not an attempt to make the United States a meritocracy, right? But instead to carry on as always as a plutocracy, but then just try to give the illusion that black people are included in the American citizenry, and using wealthy black people to do it. So the transition from that case to today's topic comes through Puff Daddy, right? Sean Combs, P. Diddy. The brother goes through so many names. Again, I am hip hop, and I go back to the 80s. As a matter of fact, I was at the University of Maryland in D.C. I've graduated from the University of Maryland, Howard, Georgetown. So I was in D.C. for a while. And I was there in 91. And at that time, Puffy had just more or less, I guess you could say, left Maryland or D.C. or the Howard area. You couldn't go to Republic Gardens or the State of the Union, D.C. Live, the Roxy, whatever. Kilimanjaros, all right, to all my DC old heads, all the Howard old heads, you remember all these places. You could not go to them without Puffy and his squad passing out flyers. So when you talk about a brother that's did not graduate from Howard, right? He attended Howard but did not graduate, but yet came back to be their keynote speaker at graduation a couple of years ago. I can't be mad at the brother because when you want to talk about someone who's hustled from the beginning, who's put in the work, this is not something that he just, I've sat around his house, wished for one day, and then was selected and it was given to him. Whatever you think of his music or whatever you think of his tactics, whatever you think of the contracts that he, between him and his label mates, you can't take away from the fact that he is a hustler, right? That in the best sense of the word, right? And one of the great things about what he's done this past week is he issued a statement supporting Byron Allen, which is significant because Puffy's own television network, Revolt, is carried by Comcast. The entity Byron Allen is suing, right? So if there's any person who has an incentive to just shut up and not let civil rights get in the way of their money, it would be Puffy in this instance. But Puff did the opposite, right? He actually issued a very public statement saying, "Don't use me as as part of the illusion of inclusion." Right? As a matter of fact, let the people know that Comcast has not even supported, was forced to support Revolt. That's number one, that they didn't even do so willingly, that they were forced to support Revolt, and then having gotten what they want because of the minority set aside by including Revolt, they haven't supported Revolt since. Right? So in a sense, Puffy really has nothing to lose, because the entity that's supposed to be supporting his operation, and he says it's a capital intensive operation, is not doing so. So we're going to talk about very specifically Puffy, Jay-Z, and his role with the Colin Kaepernick situation, Dr. Dre, right? Some hip-hop moguls from back in the day, Sylvia Robinson, Russell Simmons. What is it that we should be asking of them to say that we approve of your billions, we approve of your striving and success, and that you are lifting as you climb, and we appreciate that, versus on the other hand, you are perpetuating the illusion of inclusion and making things worse on those beneath you. All right. So that's what our main topic is for today. Um, let's before we get there, again, we want to talk about books, right? So we're going to talk about a lot of the books we have in the store relating to that topic. We have Jay-Z's Empire, State of Mind. On the other hand, we have a few books by Tupac, right? We're going to juxtapose those two artists and their commitments to social justice, or at least the way they approach their social justice. But before that, I told you last week we're going to start a weekly series here, where we're going to I'm going to give you more or less my weekly wish list. Each week, the Journal of Blacks in Higher Entertainment, Journal of Blacks in Higher Education, jbhe.org. Check them out, jbhe.org. The Journal of Blacks in Higher Education publishes a weekly book list out there by or for African American scholars. And so I just want to, again, bring to you some of the scholarly works that are out there that I particularly want to get my hands on. And know that I don't read all of these books. It's just too many. I wish I could just drink them all up. But apparently Wole Soyinka, the Nigerian Nobel Prize laureate, one of the most famous black writers, not in America, but the world. One of the most famous black writers in the world. There's Chinua Achebe, there's Wole Soyinka. I'm killing his name. But he has a book out now called Beyond Aesthetics. He has several books out, so many books. Beyond Aesthetics, Use, Abuse, and Dissonance in African Art Traditions. Following that up, there's a new book out called White Negroes, When Cornrows Were Vogue. And I'm old enough to remember when the movie 10 came out with Bo Derek, right? When Cornrows Were in Vogue and Other Thoughts on Cultural Appropriation. That's by Lauren Michelle Jackson. I'd really like to check that out. Again, you publishers out there, if you have review copies, if you want us to review your book and do a kind of review here in Hakim's Bookstore for the people, send it care of Andre Smith, a scholar in residence. There's another book called White Privilege, right? And that's just the title, White Privilege by Shannon Sullivan. I'm not familiar with Professor Sullivan, but I knew, definitely a philosopher. And anybody that's endorsed by my favorite philosopher, Charles Mills, as this book is, then I'm in. Would love to see that book or read that book, White Privilege. The Collected Poems of Lorenzo Thomas. That's an edited book by a famous poet out nowadays. Shout out to Central High School's own, Philadelphia's own, Major Jackson, another world-renowned poet up in the Northeast, one of the more famous poets going out to today. So yes, there are still people throwing it down on pen and paper without the beat behind them, right? Now, again, Major Jackson will do poetry with great artists like King Britt, also a Philadelphian behind him, with a very, very outstanding eclectic sound that's born out of hip-hop, but has taken music and poetry in some very ill directions. So again, we have poetry books in the store, the complete works of Paul Lawrence Dunbar. I have Nikki Giovanni and other folks like that here in the store. It's Kwanzaa time. Please not only get them for your children. These books are keepsakes, they're memorabilia, they harken back to another time for your mothers, your fathers, your aunts, and your uncles. Give them the books that they grew up on, right? Give them the people that they revered back in the day. Another book out today or this past week is The Black Republic, African Americans and the Fate of Haiti, right, by Brandon Bird, and that's out again, University of Pennsylvania Press, West Philly represent. The relationship between African Americans and Haiti is an interesting one, especially if you're a Philadelphian, because you know that, or you should know, or at least it's my job to tell you, you don't, that after Haiti got its independence, it was basically robbed of its treasury by a banker that they entrusted named Stephen Girard. Stephen Girard, think about the name, Girard Avenue, Girard College. Girard College is actually funded by money that most people believe is stolen from Haiti after Toussaint Louverture's revolution. And the interesting thing, for black people to not have been allowed to go to Girard College until the mid 20th century seemed a double abuse. So hopefully they're doing better. Hopefully they're honoring the legacy of Toussaint Louverture, if they've even admitted that those funds did in fact help create that school. Stephen Girard was one of the wealthiest Americans in the country at the time. You got to remember Philadelphia's place in the colonial history. It was huge back then. So those are some of the books that I'm interested in that I'll be asking Brother Chris to order for me as far as some of these publishers are concerned, and hopefully try to devour them, the great ones. We're going to try to come back and review here at the bookstore and for the people. We may even do some other video streams dedicated to certain topics. But also, again, with this topic about hip-hop and black billionaires, I also want to refer to some other books that we do have in the store. Again, we have Jay-Z's Encoded, Jay-Z's Empire State of Mind. We have several of the books by Tupac here. We even have LL, right? Again, it's not much on politics or capital accumulation. But again, LL is what? 30 years in the game? 35 years in the game? Still, at least on television. If he makes a record, if Ice-T makes a record, we're talking about brothers with over 30 to 35 years in hip-hop, right? Coming up on 40. And I'm young enough to remember when Motown 25, I thought that was the end-all be-all of celebrations. And to now find out that our artists like Chuck D, KRS-One is still putting out albums. So when you say hip-hop is dead, I have to disagree. It's just that we, as adults, we're not where hip-hop is. Back in the 80s, remember, we had to have the mixtapes to have, we had to go listen to the Lady B show on HAT. We had to listen to Jazzy Jeff on KDU. If it was on Power 99, it wasn't underground hip-hop anyway. So again, nothing's new under the sun, or as Gil Scott-Heron says, ain't no new thing. This complaint about what hip-hop on the radio, same as within the 80s, same as the 90s. We'll talk about some of that. As a matter of fact, other books we got in the store, if you want to take it back to the 80s and the 90s, pick up the Sister Soldier we got in the store. Omar Tyree, not a hip-hop artist himself, but I heard he's doing music. I heard he's actually very much into music nowadays. But West Philly's own, West Philly icon, Omar Tyree, we got some of his books stashed away in here. You can pick them up for Kwanzaa, pick them up for Christmas. Some scholarly books that I want you guys to know about. Prophets in the Hood by Imani Perry, a scholar up at Princeton who also does talks and lectures all across the country, has written several books this year. One on Lorraine Hansberry. I believe she's a Philadelphia resident still. I think you can catch her sometimes speaking at Uncle Bobby's up in Mount Airy. Again, shout out to all the black bookstores in the city, Black and Noble, Amalgam, the comic book shop, Uncle Bobby's, and anyone else out there that's bringing the knowledge to everybody. Prophets in the Hood was a great book. Black Noise by Trisha Rose was on hip-hop. If I can be selfish, hip-hop and the law. I've written on so many issues on the law, even hip-hop. So a great work edited by Pamela Bridgewater. Donald Tibbs down at Drexel. You know, there's a hip-hop and the law scholar down at Drexel, brother named Donald Tibbs. Andre Cummings, one of my colleagues from Howard Law School. I happen to have two. I'm proud. I'm going to rag on myself. I'm the only person that has two offerings in that book. On the one hand, originally wrote my very first published article as a law professor, maybe my second or third, was Other People's Property, OPP, hip-hop's inherent clashes with U.S. property laws and its rise as global counterculture. My second work that I did maybe 6 or 7 years ago was called If Hip-Hop is Dead, Did the Law Kill It? How Over-Restrictive Interpretations of Copyright Law Promote Sex and Violence in Hip-Hop Music. I think that one's pretty interesting myself. I'll give you a lecture on it. We'll talk about it one day. Or you can buy the book. Please, buy the book. Hip-Hop and the Law, the writings that formed the movement. We have books and other books in the store on some older musicians, right? We got Bob Marley books, we got Louis Armstrong books, Dizzy Gillespie. Again, for those that want to preserve the history, but those were the common names that everybody had to know when I was growing up. And then we get mad at our kids. You don't know Louis Armstrong? You don't know? Well, they don't know him if you don't tell them, right? If we don't buy them the books, if we don't have that stuff around the house for them to celebrate our culture and celebrate our modes of resistance, particularly in ways that they can groove to. And not only that, particularly in ways they can make money to. My daughter knows all the words. My second daughter, my middle daughter, Jasmine, knows all of the words to Paper Thin, MC Light. And as a matter of fact, I tell her all the time, we talk about Puffy, all Puffy did, and I don't want to say all like it's nothing, but he took the very best beats from back in the day, right? Took the very best grooves from back in the day, and that's what hip hop is, bringing them up and making them new, making them excitable and enjoyable for a younger audience. So younger audiences that listen to Puffy, they know some of the old school artists because he brought them to this younger generation, right? Are we doing the same thing while we are complaining about something? Now, I have to admit that when he did the D, the I, the D, I was mad because I'm a fan of KRS One, and you can't just remake Jimmy like that. And now when I hear the beat and it's Diddy instead of Jimmy, I get salty. But thanks to his letter in support of Byron Allen, I'm going to enjoy the D, the I, the D, the D, the Y a little more often. As a matter of fact, excuse me, it's a little winter time in Philadelphia, and we're getting uh, 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 global warming or climate change or whatever you want to call it is definitely bringing the cold weather here today. So you'll have to excuse me if I'm a little inaudible because of being under the weather. But the first thing I want to do before we talk about all these black billionaires is let me go get the statement Puffy made in support of Byron Allen, because I think that sets it off. And then I'm going to give you a matrix or a different way to understand wealth or capital in a way that will help you evaluate whether or not black billionaires are lifting as they climb or are they promoting the illusion of inclusion. So give me 10 seconds and I'm going to find this Puffy statement. All right, that wasn't even 10 seconds, I hope. But let's see. This is a statement by Sean Diddy Combs. I'm sorry, Sean Diddy Combs, but I'm going to let the world know that Puff Daddy, all the nicknames he's had, all start from Cream Puff, right? Because he came to Howard from Long Island and whatnot. And again, he wasn't the most hardcore brother in the world, but he found his place within hip hop, and he applied his hustling skills to making that money. So from Cream Puff to Puff Daddy to P Diddy to all that to Diddy to a billionaire, right? So I guess he don't care what I call him or what people remember him as way back in high school days, right? Some instead of holding on to football glory like some of us, he went out and made a new life for himself, one very lucrative. So, and I'm very proud of him in making this statement, as if he needs me to be proud. But again, let me read it off so that you can get a sense of what he said. This is the official statement from Sean Diddy Combs regarding the Comcast Byron Allen U.S. Supreme Court case. I'm going to try to talk really enunciate on this one. My name and my network, Revolt, have been mentioned recently by Comcast in reference to the Comcast Byron Allen U.S. Supreme Court case as an example of Comcast's inclusive practices with respect to African American owned cable networks. While it is true that we are in business with Comcast, it is not accurate to use my name or my network as an example of inclusion. I do not want my name to be used inaccurately, so I must speak my truth. I also want to make clear that this case is now about much more than cable distribution. It is about the civil rights of millions of African Americans and other minorities. It's absolutely correct. First, it's important that people really understand what's at stake. It's an effort to get the lawsuit filed by Byron Allen dismissed. We talked a lot about this, the procedural posture of the case last week. Comcast is arguing that this law only applies if racial discrimination is the only factor that leads to a refusal to do business, which would be extremely hard to prove. If they are successful, it would become much harder for any victim of discrimination to seek justice in court. By taking this stance, the Supreme Court Comcast has put its legal tactics ahead of the rights of millions of Americans to be heard. This is not okay. And again, this is my commentary. Is what is Comcast saying? As a matter of fact, U.S. Chamber of Commerce is also in support of Comcast, right? Because they feel as though, again, they feel like this is about the quote-unquote race card. This is white folks coming back and saying black people play the race card improperly, that the lawsuits that we file, they believe are bogus. They think are malicious, that we're just making things up, right? That we're just getting into court, suing them, and forcing them to sometimes settle when they haven't done anything wrong. That the reason why black folks aren't in there, in these places, why there isn't diversity, why in these institutions, is because of us not being qualified, and then when we're rejected, we can't take it, right? So again, this is about, oh, black people play the race card too much, and it's costing white businesses money to defend themselves. That's the argument Comcast and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce are making to make these discrimination suits harder to file, right? And many circuits across the country, the country is divided into 13 judicial circuits. And several of these circuits have already decided in favor with Comcast. Only the Ninth Circuit, which is typically the most liberal court in the country, one that Donald Trump hates. The Ninth Circuit is the one that has challenged the others and challenged the Supreme Court to say that no, that's not the correct standard, that as long as they've used it as a motivating factor, that the case should go forward and win. Above anything else, my goal, this is Puffy again, above anything else, my goal has been always to achieve true economic inclusion for black people, lifting as we climb, right? How can Comcast suggest that it champions diversity and inclusion if it attacks the laws that provide the foundation for economic inclusion? What good are any of their efforts if they are fighting to make it harder for victims of discrimination to be heard in court? So Comcast has made this about much more than Byron Allen, and now the civil rights of my children and my community are at stake. And again, we got to make that point, right? A lot of us are focused on our individual circumstances without regard to our children, our nephews, our nieces, and yes, something that we may do today may not benefit us, but it may benefit generations thereafter. It may benefit our cousins, nephews, and children. And we have to be clear about that when we talk about what is our interest. To be clear, anything that makes it harder to fight against discrimination is wrong. Comcast is choosing to be on the wrong side of history. On Revolt, I can only share the truth of my experience. Now, check this out. Again, because he has almost the beef between Stephen A. Smith and Colin Kaepernick. And the reason why people are angry at Stephen A. Smith is because his position, Stephen A. Smith is a commentator on ESPN. He's the highest paid commentator on ESPN. And again, is he lifting as he climbs, or is he promoting the illusion of inclusion because he's found himself a comfortable space within a system of white supremacy? Because his beef with Colin Kaepernick is that Colin Kaepernick is seeking a job with the NFL, and therefore, according to Stephen Smith, should do every single thing the NFL requires and asks for to get that job. That there should be no limitation, that there should be no standard or no line or no leverage at all exercised by Colin Kaepernick. That if you want something, that you have to do anything the person who has it tells you to do to get it. And I want to say how demeaning that is. I mean, that's a self-owned. Stephen A. Smith, who used to write for the Philadelphia Inquirer, is telling on himself that in order to get the $8 million salary at ESPN, he is willing to do anything that they ask. And that's what he's asking Colin Kaepernick to do. Colin Kaepernick is saying, no, if I have a valuable skill, if I have a marketable talent, yes, I do want to work for you. I do want your business, but not at all costs. Not at all costs. And in business, this is negotiation. Every business that contracts with the other is thought to negotiate with each other. I want to work with you. However, the terms and the conditions have to be correct. Stephen A. Smith seems to suggest, no, you have no right to negotiate if you're an employee or a black employee or whatever the case may be. That Colin Kaepernick has no right to negotiate with others, right? That you want their business from. When this is just antithetical to all human business practices, except when it comes to black people and their jobs, and particularly as athletes, to just take whatever is given to you, to not make any demands, but to just take whatever is given to you and appreciate it. Well, Puffy is saying the same thing here, that he's not going to be Stephen A. Smith to Colin Kaepernick when it comes to Byron Jones. Even though he has a contract with Comcast, he's going to let people know what the truth is. Starting an independent cable network is incredibly difficult and capital intensive. The start we received from Comcast, which was a condition of the United States government approval for Comcast to acquire NBC Universal, was important. This is antitrust matters. One day we'll talk about. I've worked on and written in antitrust, so we can talk about antitrust and its disfavor for monopolies and its attempt to create a meritocratic capitalist society, whatever the case, in order to stop a monopoly from being created, or at least in compensation for a monopoly being created. Sometimes the Federal Trade Commission requires that entity to bring in smaller businesses. And Comcast, in order to buy NBC Universal, apparently was required to support minority-owned businesses, and of course they want the one that can give them most bang for their buck. Revolt, Puff Daddy, something that they can promote. But Puffy is telling them that they're not even supporting. They said it was a condition, first of all, it was a condition of the United States government approval for Comcast to acquire NBC Universal, and it is not the level of support needed to build a successful African-American owned network. Not even close. Since that launch, our relationship has not grown, and Revolt is still not carried by Comcast in the most affordable packages, nor is Revolt available in all the markets that would enable us to serve our target audience. Comcast spends billions of dollars on content networks every year, but just a few million go to African-American owned networks like Revolt. That is unacceptable. Bravo to Puffy on this one. He has more. Supporting in diversity and economic inclusion requires a real partnership. And again, he's attacking the illusion of inclusion without saying it in so many words. The only way black-owned networks grow and thrive is with meaningful and consistent economic support. Otherwise, they are set up to fail. Revolt has never been in a position to truly compete on a fair playing field because it has not received the economic and distribution support necessary for real economic inclusion. Our relationship with Comcast is the illusion of economic inclusion. Can't say it more plainly than that. Rather than using this case to diminish the civil rights protections of millions of Americans, Comcast should use this opportunity to listen to a community it relies on, and above all, do better. Sean Diddy Combs. Bravo. 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 Makes me proud to be hip-hop. Makes me proud to be hip-hop, right? Again, we can talk about identities later. I'm black. I am hip-hop. I'm Philadelphian. I'm West Philadelphian, right? We have lots of identities that we also honor, right? So, we say bravo to this, but at the same time, I kind of pan Stephen A. Smith in the Colin Kaepernick situation, right? On the one hand, I'm arguing that Puffy is lifting as he climbs, whereas Stephen A. Smith is promoting the illusion of inclusion. Now, again, let's not overdo it. Again, I don't want to overdo it. I'm not into the cancel culture, right? We don't know how much Stephen A. Smith does for black interns. We don't know what he does when it comes to schools or scholarships, what have you. A book we have in the store is The Spook Who Sat by the Door. Many of you have seen the movie, and the full-length movie is available. It's great, one of the great black movies of all time. Sam Greenleaf. The movie is available on YouTube, full movie. But again, get the book. We have the book in the store, The Spook Who Sat by the Door. I'm not going to ruin the movie by telling you that Dan Freeman, he's the star of the movie. Dan Freeman is thought to be a sellout by lots of people, and there's no reason for them not to think he's a sellout. I can't tell you what he's about to do, but just know, people thought he was a sellout, right? Or again, Malcolm X. You don't know who Malcolm Little, Detroit Red, is going to be at a certain point. So, while I criticize Stephen A. Smith here, I'm not into cancel culture. I have not canceled Puff Daddy based on some of the music that he's made that I don't particularly care for. I've not canceled him for some of the contracts that he's offered to his artists that resemble the contracts that others have gotten, that the industry has pimped the wealth out of others, poor black folks that don't know any better, rob them of their intellectual property. A lot of Puffy's wealth is extracted from people that have done the work for him and then have not shared in the success. Nobody's perfect, right? So we're not elevating Puff Daddy, Sean Combs as a leader of the black community. However, politically speaking, and this is very, very important, the political world does not move without money, right? The political world does not move out without money, and it has been made worse by a case called Citizens United. You may have heard of it. So back in the 2000s, the Supreme Court that's going to decide the Byron Allen case decided the case called Citizens United, which allowed corporations and corporate entities and rich people to basically spend unlimited amounts of wealth in politics to shape the nation, right? And so to the extent that there are hundreds of billionaires in the United States of America that can use their money to promote white supremacy, that can promote fascism, that can promote plutocracy, that can promote neoconservatism. We are not in a better position by having less black billionaires, right? Having black people without wealth means that the racial wealth gap will get wider and wider and wider, because without political capital, all of the social harms and externalities and goods like pollution, crime, they're going to get zoned into our neighborhoods because we don't have the political capital to fight it off, right? Check down in Louisiana right now. Pipeline companies are taking black people's land through eminent domain because we don't have the political capital to get into the court system, to get into the legislatures and stop them. And why not? It's not because we're not activists. We protest all the time, right? When it comes to supporting the Democratic Party I don't want to hear anything about black folks being the reason Trump is president, when over 90% of black men, 90% of black women all voted for the Democratic candidate. So again, promoting the myth of inferiority by holding us responsible for Donald Trump is ridiculous. However, we have to recognize that financial capital and political capital are nearly one and the same, and that the Democratic Party is not going to do what we ask it to do if we're not the ones with the dough pulling the strings. And if we're going to do independent movements, if we're going to create independent political movements, once again, how are you going to let's just even get simply, how do you turn the lights on? How do you have office space? I'm the former, in my past life, I was the former deputy chief operating officer of the NAACP National Voter Fund. And let me tell you, activists can't do much activism if the phones are turned off, right? And so who the big donors are and the influence they have over the NAACP, over the Democratic Party, over any institution. They're not immune. So again, who has this financial capital? So if we're begging white billionaires, if we're begging white nonprofits, if we're begging George Soros for money to fund political activism, that's fantastic. That's great. That's interest convergence. It's pragmatic. It's strategic. We ought to do it. However, to the extent we're not leaning on black folks or we're over-relying on others, we're going to have to share the purposes of that protest. It won't be all ours. So how do we evaluate black billionaires and whether they're lifting as they climb, whether or not they have supported those coming behind them? Well, we know we just saw Robert Smith pay off all the debts of a class of Morehouse graduates. Isn't that fantastic? How can we put that in a matrix to describe the goodness that black billionaires can do if they choose to lift as we climb? Well, I suggest we have to look at capital in a more broad sense. And I'm going to repeat this over the life of these podcasts and series, right? There are 4 types of capital. 4. Financial, human, social, political capital. So when you're talking about wealth, financial capital is only one of those four. Your wealth, or our wealth, collective aggregate wealth, is based on those four items of capital. Financial capital, that is stocks and bonds, cash, etc., bitcoins, right? The things that people around the world see as currency. There is also human capital, right? Human capital dealing with your skills, right? What skills you have as a person, maybe even your righteousness. And so when we talk about human capital, again, we can invoke not just billionaires and whether they're supporting education for black folks to go to school and build up their own capacity within themselves. We can also talk about hip hop black millionaires and whether the music that they're producing is healthy or unhealthy for the black mind and the black soul, especially when it comes to children. Now, let me back up a little bit, because when it comes to Tupac versus C. Dolores Tucker, right, I was on the Tupac side, right? I do believe in freedom of expression. I do believe that hip hop grew out of a community that showed that Republicans and Democrats, nobody cared about us, right? No different than the today. So to hold society standards over hip hop and tell gangsters, and the thug life to me is a withdrawal from this racial wealth gap, a withdrawal from this broken system. So as much as I'm with expatriation out of America, as much as I'm with the MOVE organization or the Rastafarians who withdraw from this economic system, I believe thug life and all that stuff is also a withdrawal from this economic system. However, again, it is harmful for our kids. It does cause black death and despair, right? And worse about it is, it's not the artists that bring it to our children. It is people my age. It's people your age. We are the program directors of these radio stations that play shoot 'em up, kill 'em up music at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that play strip 'em down, have sex with anybody music at 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturdays. It is adults. It's not the children that are doing this. They may be listening. Of course they're going to listen. They're excited by it. So were we. I would listen to my dad's Wild Man Steve records when I found them, when they're hidden underneath the Earth, Wind, and Fire albums, right? It is the adults, it's the grown folks that are pushing it at inappropriate hours to the children. So I'm not so much mad at hip hop and artists, because you're supposed to be old enough and go underground to hear all this music, instead of it being gangsterism just being broadcast 24/7 on public radio stations. So that is a particular issue. So when it comes to a Puffy, when it comes to Dr. Dre, right? When it comes to, that's another hip hop billionaire, right? It's one thing to support the financial capital that they're amassing. It's another thing to hope that they're distributing it to increase our political capital that we just talked about, our ability to try to make things happen in legislation, which also, again, is a cyclical thing. Political capital affects economic capital, but also human capital, right? Are you building yourself up? Are you building up the communities? Knowledge and capacity. I mean, remember one of the greatest hip-hop songs in the world, in the history of the world, was You Must Learn by KRS-One. It was a groove. It was beats. But it also taught you black history in a song, deep black history, the Afrocentric history that you're not going to get in schools, right? We can do that with our music, right? It can be used as not just entertainment, but also a teaching tool. Again, as KRS called it, edutainment. So the black billionaires that are promoting education in their content, in their businesses, right? That is lifting as we climb, versus the illusion of inclusion. Again, we work for a bookstore. We're not a for-profit enterprise. This bookstore is not a non-profit. It's a for-profit enterprise, but doing it in such a way that increases the financial capital of the owners, but also the human capital of the customers. Hopefully, this is an even exchange. Hopefully, you get more in terms of knowledge than you gave up in terms of cash. Right? Hopefully, you look at it that way. Um, there's also social capital, right? The network that we have. Right? When we talk about institution building, cooperatives, about money circulating with each other, Hakim's Bookstore is an institution, right? And so, what are black billionaires, are hip hop's black billionaires, creating social capital? In this, Dr. Dre, right? Billionaire, Beats by Dre, plus the music. There was a big flap a little while ago about him giving a large donation to the University of Southern California's music school. And why didn't he give it to a HBCU? Well, first of all, I am not one. I try not to spend other people's money. That is their prerogative. However, we have to also argue. We will admit that that was an opportunity to create more social capital, right? That HBCUs and their music programs and what have you create networks for people that have human capital, that have talent, to be able to then join with others and build up something greater with other people, right? Because it's one thing to have knowledge, to have money, but you can't do everything yourself. Right? You can't do everything yourself. So if you're a great singer or you're a great artist, you also need an accountant. You also need a lawyer. You also need a marketer. You also need an agent, right? And the more folks we have in those communities that that are good and that you can trust, builds up that capacity, builds up that network. And we always say, well, this community does this because they loan each other money. This community does that. This community can rely on each other. That's social capital we're talking about. Right? That's social capital that we're talking about. So when we're talking about wealth, Bob Marley said, money make you rich, right? Because wealth is greater than that. It is the financial capital that we have. It is the human capital within us. It is the social capital between us. And it is the political capital, our capacity to make things happen within this larger society to protect us and our ability to accumulate all those things and make life better for ourselves and our children. So again, this ain't no new thing. We can talk about the origins of hip hop even before this when we talk about Gil Scott-Heron and James Brown, both being godfathers of hip hop, right? I don't think there's any question that both Gil Scott-Heron and James Brown can be considered the godfathers of hip hop. Although Gil Scott-Heron, on the one hand, is kind of more that progressive godfather, right? More of the democratic side, right? We need to help each one teach one, right? Whereas, and his message to the rappers, great track that attempts to school the young artists of today. Versus James Brown, who was also clearly a godfather of hip hop, but he was on the more capitalist side. He was on the making money side. James Brown had James Brown bucks. Before James Brown bucks were Bitcoin before there was Bitcoin. Right? That we can create our own currency within our communities if that's what we want, right? James Brown said not only did he say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud, he also said, I don't want nobody to give me nothing, open up the door, and I get it myself. Right? So on the one hand, you have Gil Scott-Heron asking why the government is doing us the way it's doing us. On the other hand, you have James Brown, who was more the self-help. Again, hip-hop is so panoramic with its politics. That's why I appreciate it and why we can't just say, oh, this hip-hop person makes too much money, or they're Democrat, or they're Republican, or they have this particular ideology, and therefore I'm just going to cancel them. In my view, we have to look at all their actions to determine, are they lifting as they climb, or are they promoting the illusion of inclusion? And lifting as they climb includes the opportunity to promote and amass and black capital accumulation, not just for themselves, but for the whole community in terms of human, social, and political capital. Again, Russell Simmons, Sylvia Robinson. Right, these are all black moguls that make a killing in hip hop, and we all have different standards on whether we think they did good with that money. I'm going to mention Sylvia Robinson because we don't mention women a lot in hip hop and as far as millionaires are concerned. Right, Sugar Hill Records, the very first large record label, hip hop record label, was owned by Sylvia Robinson, a black woman, and that's great. That is, and hopefully she lifts as she climbs in elevating hip hop to a national phenomenon, right? That helped bring it to a national audience and help hip hop take over the world. Yes, great. On the other hand, a lot of you know Rapper's Delight, the first hit hip hop record, was totally bitten from Grandmaster Caz and the Cold Crush brothers, right? The Cold Crush crew. So right from the start, right, we had the street MCs versus studio MCs, being the Sugar Hill Gang, right, versus Grandmaster Cash and the Crash Crew, the Cold Crush brothers. So there's always been this divide of hip hop underground versus rap music, the rap music industry that we hear on radio today. So please, if we can end this with anything, let me just ask us as old heads to stop saying kids today. Because again, as Gil Scott-Heron said, ain't no new thing, ain't no new thing, ain't no new thing. We're going to have to stop it right here. I want to go in a lot of different directions, and as we end this and talk about what we're going to do next week, I want to keep going back in hip-hop history. Right, we just went back to Tupac and Jay-Z, Jay-Z to Tupac, to Russell Simmons, to Sylvia Robinson, to Gil Scott-Heron and James Brown. I want us to go even further back. I want to next week to convince you, or allow me to convince you that hip-hop goes all the way back to the 9th century East Africa. I want you to allow me to try to convince you that race and hip-hop go back to the 9th century East Africa, right? That if you've read Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi, if you've read the book that we discussed last week by Cord Whitaker about racial thinking in medieval Europe, if you're familiar with Temple University's Nell Irvin Painter, The Invention of Whiteness, you know that they believe that whiteness has been constructed by the Europeans and that it is a new concept that we can get past in order to kind of have the socialist revolution. Well, I have beef with that, right? As an Afrocentric thinker, I have beef with the argument that race was brought to Africans, right? And I want to bring to you next week Al Jahiz, the genius, right, who wrote a book in the 9th century called On the Glory of the Black Race, right? And if that's a correct title, it proves that race was a concept known to Africans hundreds of years before Europeans, quote unquote, invented it, right? And I want to convince you that not only did race, black folks have a concept of race before Europeans, that these folks, the Zanj, a place known to the Greeks as Azania, that you can now know as Tanzania or Zanzibar and all that these folks had hip-hop. They had the origins of hip-hop in a racial context with battle MCs and diss tracks in the 9th century AD, over 1,000 years ago from today. I hope you'll give me that chance next Monday, 11 a.m., for the people at Hakim's Bookstores here on Facebook Live. I appreciate you. See you next week. Hotep.